Good morning and welcome to the NWR Virtual Investor Conference. We've already had a couple lineup of great speakers and we're here to bring you another one. My name is Elliot. I'm from Ausbiz and we will be taking you through the session. And right now joining us, we have Oventus Medical and its CEO, Chris Hart. But before I hand it over to Chris, I'll just give you a bit of background information on Oventus. It's a Brisbane-based medical device company that is commercializing a unique treatment platform for obstructive sleep apnea and snoring. Now, the company has a collaborative sleep physician dental strategy to streamline access to treatment. The lab model incorporates digital technology via intraoral scanning to achieve operational efficiencies, accuracy, and ultimately it's all about the patient outcome. So during the session, if at any time you do want to ask a question, you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a button for the Q&A. So just type in your question. We'll have a bit of a Q&A session at the end with Chris. But for now, I'll hand it over to Dr. Chris Hart, Managing Director and CEO.
Great. Thanks, Elliot. And thanks, everyone, for tuning in. As Elliot mentioned, we're a medical device company based in Brisbane. We're looking at the therapeutic market in obstructive sleep apnea. And the device that we developed, that was developed off my own need, has been now clinically proven to show to be at least 50% more effective than any other mouthguard on the market and worn twice as much as CPAP, the continuous positive airway pressure machine. So it's arguably the most effective non-invasive therapy on the market. Massive, fast-growing market. During COVID, our clinical businesses were disrupted, so we decided to develop a disruptive clinical business in return, and we now have the ability to treat patients in the home at very low cost with a very effective therapy, highly efficient and increasing access to care for patients in need. The technology in the clinical model is proven. It's generating revenue with levers in place to accelerate growth as we go through calendar 21 and start to build out of COVID. Highly scalable. We've got low fixed costs, minimal capex required, current gross margins on manufacturing about 60%, but targeting about an 80% margin over the next few months as we start to take some functionality in-house. Sleep apnea, for anyone who isn't aware, it's when you stop breathing at night. It has very significant health and socioeconomic impacts, billions of dollars in direct and indirect costs. It can lead to comorbidities such as hypertension, heart disease, atrial fibrillation, stroke, diabetes, depression. So a very serious health and economic issue. CPAP is the gold standard of care. It works, we know that. It's not always well tolerated. Out of 100 patients diagnosed with sleep apnea, about 35 will refuse CPAP out of hand. Out of the ones that do try it, around about 15 of them won't be able to make it through 90 days, and out of the 50 that continue to use it after 90 days, more than half of them will abandon therapy in the first year. So consequently, there's around about 3 million people in the US diagnosed with sleep apnea that have abandoned therapy, and that market alone is around $2.5 billion opportunity and growing very quickly. Our technology is a mouthguard with an airway in it, and the airway technology has been shown, as I said, it reduces residual events by about 50% compared to a standard mouthguard, worn on average over 6 hours a night compared to 3.5 hours for CPAP, so highly effective. The air bypasses multiple levels of obstruction as it travels through that integrated airway, and for added efficacy, we have a PEEP valve, a positive end expiratory pressure valve, which we can fit inside the extended airway, and that ramps efficacy again. So we're ordinarily switching to mouth breathing would lead to treatment failure. It actually becomes the therapy with our technology, and efficacy ramps significantly, taking it to CPAP-like levels for over 80% of patients. In fact, when we show the data to sleep and respiratory physicians, the most common response is, why don't we use this first and then use CPAP later if we need to, because we can always add it into therapy. That being the case, we look at the market and we say, well, if mouthguards are so easy to use, why are they only 10% of the therapeutic market? One of the issues has been that they've had variable efficacy, and we've dealt with that now with our airway technology. We've increased it to CPAP-like efficacy for the vast majority of patients. The other two issues are a complex patient pathway and competing economic imperatives. So if you talk to a sleep doc, they'll say, well, if I refer the patient to a dentist for a mouthguard, I'll probably never see him again, and the dentist is probably going to charge them thousands of dollars. And if you talk to the dentist and ask why they don't refer to the sleep physician more often, they'll say, well, because the patient gets put on CPAP and I never see them again. So now that we have the most effective therapy on market, we needed to develop an innovative way to get it into the patients, into their therapy. And the way we've done that is we realised that this complex patient journey with multiple bleed points bouncing between sleep physicians, respiratory physicians, primary care physicians, GPs, dentists, Dr. Google, diagnosis, new diagnosis, and with insurance in the middle, very high levels of bleed. Patient conversion rates are relatively low. What we realised with our technology is that we didn't need to go between the dentist and the sleep physician and the GP. We could actually just pop a scanner in those facilities and have the patients treated on site. Additionally, in doing so, we were able to generate additional revenue for both the sleep facility and the dentist. And so, it's a highly effective therapy now delivered in 3 easy steps as opposed to 12 or 13 steps, delivered on site, simple patient journey, and with all of the stakeholders benefiting in the revenue streams. And again, when COVID hit, we lost access to most of our facilities. So we had signed contracts across around about, 40 clinics at the time. We'd launched 14. We were rolling out 3 or 4 a month, and overnight we were back to 2. We then engaged in telehealth. So we started talking to patients online. Our sleep physician partners were already doing that. And so within 2 weeks, we'd set up a telehealth solution. And as a result of that, we were able to continue to engage with patients virtually. And actually, our conversion to therapy rates increased from 50% to 80%. So we started to streamline that patient journey even more. Then, as the pandemic wore on, we also developed home impression kits. And so now we can deliver the therapy to the patient's home completely. They don't need to come into the laboratory at all. So as the model evolved, it turns out that we've reduced capital requirements to nearly zero. We've lowered our fixed costs to nearly zero within the clinical setting. We've got national coverage with our fixed facilities. So we have dentists contracted across multiple states, as we do sleep physicians. We can manage the patient virtually in the home across all states in the US and Australia as well as in Canada. And the care can be delivered at lower costs and in a much more convenient fashion. So we've increased scalability. We've got centralized patient management. So irrespective of whether that patient comes from a sleep lab, a DME distributor, a CPAP, whether they find us online, they consult Dr. Google, whether they're in a sleep physician's room, it doesn't matter. The minute they schedule with us virtually, we take them into care. We work the patient up, verify their insurance, talk about any out-of-pocket expenses, confirm their candidacy for therapy, and then we'll either ship an impression kit or schedule them for a scan with the dentist. And that process really is what turns patients into callers into patients and generates revenue and generates value for everyone involved. Is telehealth here to stay? We think it is. There has been a quantum shift in patients and the public's perception of telehealth. Pre-COVID, about 11% of people would use telehealth. Now 76% are interested in continuing to use it moving forward, and 74% report high satisfaction. And we've certainly seen that in our clinical business. The vast majority of our interactions now are via telehealth. When we first launched our clinical business, we had contracts signed across sites before we even had FDA clearance. Those contract signings have increased over time. We were expanding our clinical footprint until COVID hit. And if you look at that light blue part of the bar graph, you can see it shrunk again in the fourth quarter FY20, and then started to open up again as we traded out of COVID, and we started to implement our virtual workflows, both in the sleep facilities and in DME distributors of CPAP. Once we developed the home care model with our impression kits, that drew the attention of VGM, which is the largest network of home care respiratory providers in the US with over 2,500 members. We signed a marketing distribution agreement with them, and we believe that arrangement has enormous potential and have started to work with their groups earlier this year. Our revenue ramp and unit sales were increasing pre-COVID. As I said, we got Optima approved at the end of the first quarter FY20. We launched our first sites in the December quarter. We were growing in the March quarter. We were truncated by COVID. In the June quarter last year, obviously, we fell back. But because we engaged in telehealth and home care, we've managed to open up again back on trajectory. And the telehealth part of the business is certainly accelerating. The telehealth is fairly tightly coupled to our device sales and revenue. And as those funnels are opening up and the sites are opening up again, we're seeing telehealth accelerate ahead of unit sales. So unit sales are growing steadily, good double-digit growth every quarter except for the COVID quarter, as I'd call it. And even with COVID still doubling down the last 2 quarters, we're in harder lockdowns for the last quarter and most of this quarter than we were previously. But we still managed to grow device sales even within that macroeconomic environment, which we're very pleased with. Continued growth this quarter, quarter to date, on a similar trajectory to previous quarters. But I think what's interesting is that our telehealth is accelerating, and that's our lead indicator of unit sales. Conversion rates are anywhere from 50 to 80% on those telehealth numbers, depending on whether they're in network or out of network with insurance. And that ability to treat patients in their home via telehealth has allowed us to continue to operate. As those sites reopen where we have fixed facilities, we've expanded off a broader base. We've launched more sites. We have 40 sites launched, 24 operational. As those others come back online, we're looking to expand from a broader base. Patient flow is down by about half at the moment across North America, and as that patient flow improves, we'll have the benefit of more sites and also increasing patient flow. But on top of that, our virtual lab and lab program using telehealth and home care has been picked up by 3 national groups now, one in the US being VGM, and also Connect DME in the US, and then in Australia, Circadian Health Technologies as well. So that's exciting. That gives us access to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of patients to offer this care to. And then we've also developed and piloted a direct-to-consumer approach, which is actually accelerating extremely quickly, much faster than what I had expected. In terms of reopening, we have 11 sites up in Ontario. There's been a hard lockdown, stay-at-home orders since November. They're still not back to full functionality, but at least they can leave their home now. We're looking at those sites coming back online in a more meaningful way. We had 4 sites in the Carolinas affected in January. One's reopened this month, or last month, sorry. The other's looking to reopen next quarter. We have 1 site in California, which was shut down for 3 months, which reopened last month, and we're launching another one virtually this month. We have our VGM model, negotiations underway with first contracts and first patients scheduled even before we finalise initial contracts. And the direct-to-consumer model, it's ready for expansion. It actually now is really ready to ramp up. So VGM, just to recap, 2,500 members, 7,000 sites. Typically, we're looking at groups of up to 1,000 CPAP setups a month. A CPAP setup's a 90-day trial. Patients need to show that they can use the CPAP 5 nights a week, 4 hours a night for the DME or the HME distributor of CPAP to be paid. If they can't show that, they won't get paid. But for that 25 to 35% of patients who, for whatever reason, can't achieve that, they can now be offered O2 vent therapy and generate additional revenue for these 2,500 members of the largest respiratory care organisation in the US. The recruitment is via internal marketing, so it's low cost. Direct access to large patient numbers and direct-to-consumer co-marketing to accelerate ramp-up. So we're very excited about that opportunity. We're just starting off with them, but we think that represents an enormous growth opportunity in calendar 21. Direct-to-consumer, we piloted, earlier in the year. Things were still pretty heavily locked down, and we thought, well, these patients are in the home, maybe we should see if we can actually diagnose them and treat them in the home. And that's actually proven to be more successful than what we first thought. We literally only launched it mid-February. We've generated first revenue, which is well before we would in a traditional lab-in-lab model. And it's now become the largest single referral source out of all our referral sources. We have low customer acquisition costs. It's highly scalable, and we've got low operating costs. Additionally, because there are no fixed costs in the facilities, we can actually reduce the cost significantly to the patient and maintain value for all the stakeholders. And I think that combination, as well with our medical model, lab-in-lab, and our virtual lab program through large national distributors of CPAP, I think we're very well positioned to accelerate growth in calendar 21. I think we're actually at 70 sites contracted now, 40 sites launched, 24 operating, but looking to reopen many of them over the coming months. We've certainly improved our business systems with a very scalable, low-cost business model, being able to treat the patients anywhere, anytime. We controlled costs through COVID. We are starting to invest now to scale up to meet demand. Our COVID response has led to, enabled us to continue to build through COVID. We had good growth in the half year and cash funding through to the back end of the year with the balance sheet as it stands now. I think we're better positioned now than we've ever been. We intend to continue to ramp the lab-in-lab model by relaunching and launching more sites. We're going to continue negotiations with national groups and implement the virtual lab-in-lab program. We're going to optimise these sites, look to target a reduction in COGS. We have a 510K application for XVent to work on to get that into market this year. And while we control costs, we want to continue to launch with strategic partners in other markets as well, which we are doing with the announcement of our strategic relationship with the first group in Australia, Circadian Healthcare. a very supportive board. Many of them, great US NEDs as well, with deep depth and experience in the US market. And of course, patients are our number one priority. We look after them and everything else looks after itself. And we're lucky to have such wonderful patients that we help, and we continue to help. And the feedback is always phenomenal from these patients, and makes me remember anyway why I invented the device and built the business. So very tightly held. I think we're incredibly undervalued at the moment, but we aim to continue to build value in the year ahead so that we can build that share price as well. I will pause there. Actually, sorry, just one more thing. Investment highlights. We have a patented solution for sleep apnea. There's a high failure rate in CPAP. We can treat up to 80 or more than 80% of patients. We have our commercialisation is accelerating. We had good revenue growth in the half year on the previous corresponding period. The business model's proven. It's now expanded into lab and home care. Contracts are continuing to be executed. Sites are continuing to launch, and we can now scale that virtually as well. COVID does seem to be subsiding, and things are reopening, which is great. More national groups coming on board just this week with Connect DME and Circadian Health. And we have additional levers for growth in the direct-to-consumer market as well. So now I will pause and take some questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris, for running us through it. I guess first and foremost, there are a few other mouthguard style devices out there. How does Oventus Medical differentiate itself in the market and sort of show its unique offering?
Two ways. The technology is unique, and we may be a mouthguard, but we're actually an airway management platform. We regulate breathing by bypassing upper levels of resistance on inhalation and then controlling, adding resistance into controlled exhalation. And what that does, as you breathe, it's the negative pressures that are generated by the upper levels of resistance that lead to the airway locking shut. If we're just bringing the jaw forward, we're not dealing with those upper levels of resistance. We're only controlling the tongue base. The tongue base is a primary site of obstruction in about 20% of cases, and a secondary site in a further 20%. So bringing the jaw forward, we've got about a 50-50 strike rate. By bypassing upper levels of resistance on inhalation and managing flow on exhalation, we're actually increasing that efficacy by about 50% and increasing the success rates up to over 80%. So we can stabilise the mandible more so than advancing. We don't tend to have to draw the jaw as far forward, but it's the airway management technology that actually leads to the significant ramp in efficacy, and that's what gets the sleep physicians excited. And of course, the ability now to deliver it remotely to the patient's home, within sleep physicians' rooms, within CPAP shops, online. We can now treat these patients anywhere, anytime, in a collaborative model that includes both the dentist and the sleep physician. So I think those two differentiators are very significant.
In terms of delivering it to remote areas, how do you make sure that the device is the correct size for various patients, or do they still need to find a dentist to help fit it correctly?
We do have dentists, but it's done virtually. So we actually ship an impression kit to the patient's home. If you've seen Smile Direct Club or Candid or Bite, they've been doing it for aligners for a long time. And we have a dentist that will then walk the patient through their virtual dentist-guided virtual impression. That gets shipped back to us. We digitise, design and ship the device back to the patient, and again, fitted virtually under dental supervision. So it's fully dentist supervised, it's custom made, and it's precision fit. We get a 98% fit rate in this program.
And what sort of protection does Oventus have to ensure that competitors won't try to replicate your unique approach to tackling this problem?
So we have 9 families of patents. The first one approved globally in the concept of an airway, allowing air to flow from the mouth to behind the last standing tooth. And then 8 follow-on patents on around such things as design, manufacture, the X-vent valve, different variations of the technology, CPAP interfaces, predictive algorithms. We have a very, very deep moat of IP protection as well as IP insurance. So the technology is very well protected.
And tell us, what is the status of the X-vent FDA application? What sort of stage is it up to?
So that has been slowed down by COVID, unfortunately. We are still pending. We're hoping to hear back mid-year from the FDA on that. We did put a lot of work into pre-discussions with them, but that has been slowed down. We're fortunate in that sleep groups in the US, and the US is obviously, it's available everywhere else in the world except China. Fortunately, sleep physicians can see how good the technology is, and they're actually adopting the technology with a view to, when it is available, they'll retrofit the valve into the existing devices if the patients aren't responding to therapy with the optimal alarm. And all devices we have manufactured are able to have the valve fitted to them.
Now, Chris, obviously we have gone over sort of, I guess, the remote part of Oventus, but of the sites that are physically scanning patients, are they subject to any sort of minimum quotas? And if not, is that something that you would look at bringing in?
So we do have minimum quotas in the contracts. They're not take or pay quotas. The minimum quotas are there basically from a regulatory point of view. Through COVID, most of these groups are trending at about half quotas or just under half quotas, and that's a reflection of the fact that patient flow to the clinics is reduced by 50 to 60%, which is why we developed the telehealth and home care model, so that we can actually treat these patients in the home and augment our device sales and revenue in that way. And that the early signs are incredibly encouraging and exciting actually on that front. So, we look at what patient flow looks like, and then we can reassess those quotas as we trade out of COVID. So yes, we have quotas. They're not take or pay. But there are risks and levers involved. We can terminate the agreement if the quotas aren't met. And there are non-competes around that. We've chosen not to, obviously, because it's not really normal trading conditions. So we're working with those groups to come out of COVID and hopefully get them back to quotas. And we aim to do that through calendar 21 as things open up again.
Now, Chris, if we do focus a little bit on the financials, can you give us an idea of the cash on hand and the cash burn rate?
Sure. So there was 4.8 million at the end of the quarter. Last quarter, 1.6 million was the burn rate, which gives us just over 3 quarters of cash without revenue. We have invested a little bit more this quarter as we scale up for these national groups that we're onboarding, and obviously in return for that we build revenue. So we're aiming to build revenue to offset burn through the quarters as we move through calendar 21.
And looking at supply chains, are the devices all manufactured in Australia and then shipped overseas, or do you have other manufacturing units closer to customers? And I guess what is the risk to supply chains, if any?
So the only thing that crosses borders for us is data. We have a printing facility in the US and one in Australia. And we're able to basically print in both of those locations without too many dramas. So if one goes down, we can ship from the other, for instance. At the moment, we print everything in the US in Oregon. So we are shipping some devices back to Australia, but we do have an ancillary. We have a facility in Australia as well. And depending on scale and timing, we'll flip between the two, but we have the ability to be able to manufacture within the market that we're delivering in, and mostly we do.
And Chris, how does the Connect DME agreement differ from the VGM arrangement?
It's an interesting market, the US market, and I think what's really interesting about that agreement is that it's a cash pay. So they contract directly as a third-party administrator with large organisations or medium to large organisations that are large enough to self-insure their employees. So instead of going through Blue Shield, Blue Cross or whoever else, Green Shield or Aetna or whatever, the organisation's chosen to basically fund the healthcare for their employees. So that means that we don't need to jump through the same hoops we need to jump through when we're dealing with insurance. It's a cash pay model. It's a fee-for-service model. And so that we think that's going to be a very good opportunity for us to grow sales pretty quickly.
And in terms of those sales, can you give us an idea as to specifically the Australian sales and the launches that you've had in the country?
At the moment, Australia does not make up the lion's share of our revenue. We have not put an enormous amount investing into the Australian market. We have focused primarily on the North American market. Having said that, we do manage some sites in Australia for Air Liquide, and that's growing. We've launched telehealth in a limited way in Australia. We have just signed a distribution agreement with Circadian Healthcare Holdings. They manage fatigue and alertness for large transport logistics, 24/7 FIFO type companies. So there's a massive need there in fly in, fly out workers, miners, transport workers, large industrial work sites. I think that's going to be very interesting. So while we have not made it a major focus, we're actually gaining great traction in Australia, and I think that'll continue to accelerate through the year.
And Chris, in terms of that acceleration through the year, what do you see as the biggest risks over the next 12 months, and how are you going to try and mitigate those?
I think one of the risks we have is that we will need to scale up the number of clinical educators that are managing the patients centrally, as well as people training the sites on how to identify and schedule patients. So we are actually in the process of identifying talent at the moment to that end. And then, we've got some pretty impressive levers with direct-to-consumer VGM, Connect DME, Circadian, plus the existing lab and lab rollout. So if it all pops at once, we would need to move very quickly to add printers. But it's about a 3 to 4 month lead time. And because of our telehealth funnel, we can see what's coming down the pathway. So, I think we will probably need to expand production in the back end of the year. I think we can get up to around about 800 or 1,000 devices a month with our existing infrastructure.
Well, Chris Hart from Oventus, thank you so much for answering the questions, for taking us through a bit more about the company today. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.